So today we're like actually getting into some real vertebrate stuff. I don't know, I don't think there are any vertebrates in this beautiful mural, but you can still look at this beautiful mural and really like it. Um, so the early Paleozoic, that Paleozoic, right, is the first era where we have a really good fossil record. Cambrian is the first period. This is a mural. I'm oh, very confident, but I'm not remembering exactly. It's from the Ordovician periods, the period after the Cambrian. So a lot of these animal clades are present. Those big purple things are those sea lilies, things related to starfish and things like that today, echinoderms. I hope you can see there's those little corals with the orange flower-looking shapes. There's a snail down there. There's some clammy guys, some brachiopods, which kind of look like clams. Big old octopusy squid thing. Orthocone is what that one's called. Lots and lots and lots of bigger animals, bigger diversity. And vertebrates are a part of this diversity. And so the early Paleozoic, as you guys probably can infer, is a story pretty much all in the oceans. There's not a lot we're going to be able to talk about on land for a while because none of these clades, in the early parts of the Paleozoic anyway, are really up on land in any way that's very consistent. So, to remind you though, where we actually left off on Tuesday in lecture was looking at this, which is like modern animals. All five of the organisms on this slide are living things. You can go see them all today out in nature or in an aquarium or something like that. The magpie you could see today, of course. And so the magpie is representing all the tetrapods, all the land animals of land vertebrates today, amphibians and reptiles, birds and mammals. The magpie is representing all of them. Everything else on the slide is a kind of thing you might be comfortable calling a fish. And I wouldn't really disagree with you if you called the other four things fish. But fish as an idea is one of those paraphyletic ideas. Some fishes are closer to us than others. That lionfish up there is closer to the magpie in terms of its evolutionary heritage than it is to the shark or either of these other two weirdos over here. And so this is the most ancient split in vertebrata, crown group vertebrates. One side are these animals called cyclostomes, and then the other side, the side that we're a part of, is a clade called gnathostomes. So stomata, the stome here is referring to the mouth, and then we've got two different kind of words in front of that stomata word. Cyclostome is referring to like a round structure, a round mouth, and then gnathostome, gnath is the jaw. These animals over on the right-hand side are jawed vertebrates. They have a jaw on their mouth. You also have a jaw, so does a shark, so does a lionfish. So we're going to get into gnathostomes for most of this class. Cyclostomes are the only living clades we have of what are called jawless fishes. Sometimes they're called agnathans, meaning they don't have a jaw. But the clade that the two living groups are a part of are called cyclostomes. Do you guys know these two cyclostomes? People have seen these animals before? Yes? Raising your hands? That's good. So I want to show them to you, of course, because what you have to remember is like, yeah, we can talk about humans and magpies or other things, but there are living jawless fishes today that are totally living great lives, relatively good species numbers. Almost 80 species of this clade of cyclostomes called the hagfishes are alive right now. They're often in the really deep seas. I did see one once because a seagull caught one when I was on a boat and I saw a hagfish. I was like, I couldn't believe it. So who knows anything about hagfishes? Some people have heard weird things about hagfishes. They're popular. Yeah, Colton, what's something about hagfishes? They make a mucus, like a slime. That's true. What else? Other people know stuff about hagfish? Who's never seen a hagfish before? That makes me so happy. Good. Because this is one of those things that's really bizarre, right? If you go back to first lecture we ever had, and there was that big pie chart of all the different vertebrate groups and like 30,000 species of like bony fishes, and I have a little clownfish logo. One of the clades that doesn't have very many species is this one. It's the other jawless fish clade's another one. So these are weird animals, but you can imagine how they're really helpful to us from an evolutionary context because a lot of the first vertebrates in the Cambrian period, the next period after that, which is the Ordovician, the next period after that, which is the Silurian, a lot of these early vertebrates are jawless fishes. And so living jawless fishes, maybe, maybe not, can help us understand the ecology of some of these extinct forms. So there's a hagfish, slime. Any other factoids people know about hagfishes? That's awesome if you haven't seen one before. That makes me really happy because that's my job is to show it to you. Yeah, Brooklyn? They do tie themselves in knots. So here's what their mouths look like. So just because it doesn't have a jaw doesn't mean it doesn't have a mouth. And so it has kind of an oral apparatus that does move. It has things that I bet you guys would say look kind of like teeth. They are kind of like teeth. Chemically, they're different from the bone and enamel, dentin and enamel teeth that you have. There's more phosphate in these, but they're still functionally like teeth. A lot of these early vertebrates you guys are going to see are experimenting in a lot of different ways with hard tissues. In the mollusk side of things, they're making hard shells out of like calcium carbonate. The arthropods are making exoskeletons that have another chemical signature. The vertebrates try a lot of different hard tissues. This animal, a hagfish today, barely ossifies any part of its skeleton. Most of its skeleton is cartilage. Even though it has vertebrae, it's still pretty cartilaginous. And it has these things that sure do seem like teeth and functionally are a lot like teeth, but chemically they're different than your teeth. So it's so cool that this is a living animal because we can then study it and understand how vertebrates use their hard tissues. They do tie themselves in knots. Sort of the ecology of hagfishes today is that they are like deep sea scavengers for the most part. So you can imagine like the deep, dark black ocean where there's no sunlight, a big fish or a whale or who knows what dies and falls to the deep bottom. These are some of the cleanup crew that like scavenges all the meat off. So they'll like grab on to like, the whale flesh, and then they'll tie themselves in a knot and push that knot with their muscles down their body to like pull off a piece of meat. They don't have jaws to bite. They kind of got to rasp on and then pop off some flesh, which is really cool. So here's a nice picture from a deep sea probe that goes down to the deep oceans. That's a lot of vertebrae from a much bigger vertebrate, a whale that's dead. And then all these dudes here are hagfishes coming along to clean up after it. They do make a lot of slime. That's a Japanese fish market, or fishermen at least. And so it's a defensive mechanism for these animals. So they have a mouth. There's all these gill openings right here. Sorry, gill opening right there. So that's the pharyngeal gill slit that all deuterostomes have. Water goes in and it comes out right here. I'm sorry, all chordates have. But along their bodies, they have these glands that puke out mucus, and it's a defensive thing. And so I don't think I have it for you on this. Yeah, I don't have it for you in this class because this isn't comparative anatomy. But if this was comparative anatomy, I'd show you them using their mucus a lot, which is really cool. They can like make the water around them turn into jelly, and then like another fish can't swallow them. So this is a guy trying to process hagfish, and of course they're all getting mad at him, and now the water becomes unusable, and he gets stuck in it. It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Is that the kind of thing that would make a fossil? Nope. Nope. So it's kind of one of those things where like, cool that they're alive, because we can be like, what? This is how they live their little lives. Here's one of the only good hagfish fossils in the world. So they don't make strong fossils because they don't really have a lot of hard parts in their bodies. This is from Lebanon. It's from 95 million years ago. So in the Cretaceous period, so big time dinosaur time. Right now in class, we're hovering about 500 million years ago, maybe a little bit less today. And I'm showing you something that's like less than 100 million years ago. So the fossil record for hagfishes is not particularly good. Maybe that's because they're deep ocean animals, and we just straight up don't have a lot of fossils from the deep ocean, period. Could be part of it. But this fossil is interesting because it has the gill arch structure, but then also these dots all along this skeleton that people interpret as those slime glands, which is really cool. Obviously, you could take all the living hagfishes today and understand their phylogeny using genetics, and it totally makes sense that like a slime-producing hagfish should exist in the Cretaceous. Do all hagfish, going back all the way 500, have slime glands? I don't know. I don't think so, I bet, but I don't, we'd have to talk about it. Point I want you guys to see here is that like, yikes, not a great fossil record for this clade. Here's the other group of jawless fishes today. They're called lampreys. We have lampreys in Idaho. If you go into the Snake, especially the other side of Shoshone Falls, you can find lampreys. Anybody know anything about lampreys? Yes, Ethan.
Climb.
How do they climb?
They suction on the flat rock surfaces and they essentially scoop up them.
Okay. Yeah, so they have a mouth that they can use to suction onto stuff. That would be cool. I know there's a lot of fishes that do that. I personally just have never heard of lampreys doing that, but I believe you. What else? Yeah, Trevor.
So I've heard that they will like lash on to other fish and like suck out the blood.
That's kind of their thing. They are mostly, as adults, not all of them, but a lot of them are like what you'd call parasitic on other fishes. Here's a lamprey's mouth. Lamprey mouth. I think you'll agree, quite different than hagfish mouths. Maybe also unpleasant, but I don't think much of the anatomy is quite the same. Yeah, what's up, Caden?
Speaking of the anatomy, pretty sure it's the when you look like down its throat, there's some other body there. And I'm pretty sure that is it's kind of like Alien in movies where it's like a little thing that comes out and actually.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. So this thing right here is what's called a rasp. A rasp. So they will suction onto a fish, and then that thing will come out and like scrape. That's what it looks like. So these animals, some lampreys, certainly the ones we have here in Idaho, are also anadromous, which is just like what salmon are, where like have their babies in fresh water. The babies grow up in the stream a little bit, but mostly get washed out to sea, really mature in the saltwater oceans, and then swim back up rivers to reproduce. That's the salmon story. Lampreys, some of them have the exact same story because they're just like professional parasites on salmonids like trout and salmon, which is really fun. Again, a round mouth, no actual jaw, and then tooth-like structures, again, with like a phosphate base, which is different than the bone and enamel you have in your teeth. So interesting things here. Mouth, pharyngeal gill stuff. We've got a notochord, of course, a dorsal hollow nerve cord. They have vertebrae. Sometimes they, well, they don't really turn them into bone very well. They mostly are the cartilage precursors to bone, but they're still vertebrae. They have the caudal fin, all these other features. So that's what I just said. They have this life cycle that's very similar to the life cycle of salmon. And then my favorite factoid about lamprey, honestly, is I hope something you guys also think is cool from a paleontology perspective. These are really young lamprey. And if you remember those amphioxus, those early chordates that aren't themselves vertebrates, baby lampreys of some species, not all, but of some species, park their little butts in the sand and then pump water into their mouths and out over their gills, and they filter feed, which is just like what those amphioxus do, those lancelets do today too. But this is a proper vertebrate, and at a stage of its life cycle, it's a little filter feeder, and then when it gets big enough, it becomes a parasite on other fishes. Isn't that fun? Again, if this was an extinct lineage and we didn't have any lamprey today, it'd be really hard to know these things. But to be like, wow, what if you have a lot, but maybe not all of the fish anatomy, and you're still a filter feeder? These ones are. You can watch them. That's cool. That's really fun. Lampreys have a little bit better of a fossil record than hagfishes do, but again, they don't really ossify their skeletons. We're going to talk about anatomy, skeletal anatomy next week in lab and the week after that in lab. And so a lot of the vertebrate skeleton, especially the one you guys have, has a precursor in cartilage. Your bones are made of cartilage before your body replaces them with the tissue we call bone. These animals don't really do that. And so they don't actually make very many hard parts. And so therefore they don't make very often really good fossils. But there's two pretty nice ones. Priscomyzon is pretty old, 360 million years ago, from the Devonian of South Africa. It actually has that larval structure. We think this is a baby that looks a lot like the modern ones with the like park your butt filter feeding kind of style, permanently through the mouth with the gill slits. And then here's another one from one of these lake deposits in China. You guys are going to hear about these lake deposits about 120 million years ago in the Cretaceous period. This is when there's lots of dinosaurs with feathers and lots of mammals, early placental mammals and marsupial mammals. Those same lake beds have produced these fossils of this lamprey called Mesomyzon, which helps us understand a lot about lamprey evolution. I think what's cool about it is that it seems to have this similar lifestyle of living lampreys, and a lot of its anatomy is really, really, really consistent with what we just totally see in living lampreys today. But again, these fossils are not really close to the time period you and I are talking about right now, like the Cambrian, 500 some million years ago. 120, 360, that's getting pretty old. That's certainly Paleozoic, but it's not as old as everything else we're kind of in the middle of right now. But that's the best we got. Those are the fossils humanity has found so far of like hagfishes and lampreys. We can still do something like this though. I just showed you a fossil lamprey from about 360 million years ago. There's no fossil hagfishes. There's kind of one, actually, it's controversial. It's up there in the Carboniferous. There's definitely the one I showed you from the Cretaceous. But we can still take that tree with the magpie and the lionfish and the shark, and then these two jawless fishes, and using DNA, estimate the divergences. And so we can do that. Still have that monophyletic clade vertebrata, that node vertebrata, sister lineages, sister cyclostomes, sister to gnathostomes, jawless mouths, circular mouths. But then this is one of those, I've made this one, time-calibrated phylogenies. That's the Lamprey and Hagfish fossil record, and that's the gnathostome fossil record. I think it's really fun that we have fossils of jawed vertebrates that are much older than any fossil we have of the living groups of jawless vertebrates. That's just what the fossil record shows us. Luckily, I mean, why is there so much white space? There's a lot of fossils. Here's some of the stuff I showed you guys on Tuesday. Cambrian early vertebrates. They're stem vertebrates. They're much closer related to vertebrates than anything else that's alive right now, but they themselves are not within this clade. They're outside this clade. Crown group vertebrates, stem vertebrates. So some of these things, like Metaspergina, or that, what are the other one I showed you? Hycoichthyes is in this clade right here. These are these outgroups to Vertebrata. They can help us understand that like early chordate to true vertebrate transition a little bit. This one's got more developed eyes maybe than this one does, but they're outside the vertebrate crown group. And then there's so many fossil lineages that we can use anatomy to make our, really well-supported hypotheses for how they are related to one another. Today, hopefully, we're going to talk about all these different lineages of jawless fishes that we do actually have good fossil records for. Some of these lineages seem likely to be actually sister to the cyclostome clade. So stem cyclostomes would be these two, brown group cyclostomes, hagfish and lamprey. These fishes closer to them than to anything else. And then all these other ones seem to be stem gnathostomes, closer and closer to the common ancestor of all the vertebrates today that have jaws. That's like you and sharks. But they're not within that group, they're here. All these ones are crown group vertebrates, but stem cyclostomes, stem gnathostomes. That's really fun, I think. These time-calibrated phylogenies are very important to paleontology because I could just take a period like the Cambrian and just stretch the box like this. And so if you guys look at these kind of a diagram where the gray boxes represent the real amount of time where we really have fossils from these different groups, and then the phylogeny is our inferences for how they're related to one another, you can see how you can make like really interesting predictions about the fossil record, what we're missing, what we're not missing, when things might have happened. And so do me a favor and just talk to your neighbors just for a second. Tell me about what's going on, maybe, in the Cambrian based on this diagram, like in that Cambrian period here. Okay, do that, please. All right, so what are some things? I'm not looking for anything particular right now. Yeah, Kate.
There definitely are fins, but there's kind of a lack of them for what you expect to see on fish.
So what do you mean? Say it again. So a lack of fins?
Yeah, a lack of fins for being in mostly water.
A lot of these animals don't have a lot of fins. I think that's fair. That's like a general observation maybe about the clade. That's the big, this whole clade meaning everything on this slide. Okay, what else are people talking about? Yeah, Trevor.
So if this phylogeny is lined up with the time periods, it looks like the two groups on the far left, I don't know how to pronounce that, but the two groups on the far left, it looks like they go extinct during that period because they're not above.
Yeah, the fossils from this is a big group. There's a bunch of stuff in here. That one Hycoichthyes I showed you is in this group. And then this is a genus all by itself. These ones are known from the Cambrian. They're not ever found after the Cambrian. So this is literally just like, that's what we got. And there's nothing alive right now to tie them to. So yeah, probably, yeah. Cambrian is when they lived. What else? Yeah, Carmen?
The Cambrian period kind of just encompasses that entire bottom line you have, so.
Yeah.
Or just huge.
So theoretically, we should expect there to be a lot of diversity happening. You know, my diagram here is a little bit of a cartoon, but you guys can be like, okay, he's got this drawn. So like there's a bunch of splits that are inferred to happen in the Cambrian, but I'm not showing you a gray line that goes that far. So we might not have the fossils to show that. So maybe, you know, that is correct. Maybe it's not correct. Maybe this split is actually right here and just happens really quickly. That would still be consistent with the fossils we have. But yeah, Cambrian, I think, as a period of like actually really high levels of like splitting that we can manifest in these big, big, big clades. I agree with that. One thing I'll tell you guys I think about, Conodonts are a group of these early fishes that have a record that goes way back in the Cambrian. This is a clade that is definitely, we think, a crown vertebrate. It's older than Metaspergina. So Metaspergina is one of those ones I showed you on Tuesday that like has eyeballs and a gill basket and all these things, but it's definitely not like an ancestor because it lives in time after I already know I have fossils of animals that are part of the crown group vertebrates. So there's always going to be that happening where animals like this are helping us understand evolution down here probably, but they themselves are like probably nothing to do with like ancestor of later groups. That makes sense. What were you going to say?
I have a question. Is like the Cambrian and Paleozoic era based on the evolution of vertebrates?
I'm going to say no. All of these geological time periods, when they first kind of get delineated, are almost totally based on invertebrate fossils because the fossils there are so much richer. Vertebrates are really delicate and uncommon in the Cambrian and actually the Ordovician too, whereas like the trilobites and the brachiopods and those are like corals, like easy. So most of these names come from people observing turnovers in the invertebrate marine animals. And then vertebrates kind of we can just put on top. Okay, so that's the Cambrian. Here's my little summary slide for the Cambrian. You guys remember you have the Hadean and the Archean and the Proterozoic. Here's my Cambrian summary slide for you guys. Big picture stuff I want you to keep in mind. So the Cambrian goes from 539 up to 487. Really important in terms of like science, I would say. It's like this explosion, quote unquote, of animal diversity, all kinds of clades. Vertebrates are also, chordates in general, but within chordates, vertebrates are a big thing in terms of showing up first in the Cambrian and then being really kind of everywhere after that. So that's the big deal. Trilobites are this group of invertebrate animals that dominate this thing called this Cambrian evolutionary fauna. We're going to talk about that in lab in a couple of weeks. I'm not going to overdo it right now. But the Cambrian kind of oceans look really unique. And then the next period after that kind of established the oceans we're really used to. So these weird Cambrian oceans exist, but not for all that much time outside of the actual Cambrian. Here's what land looks like. Here's what the Earth looks like. A geologist would make a map for you of how we think the continents are arranged. Whenever you see a map like this from me, you're going to see a lot of maps like this from me. The people who made these maps have the prime meridian, as you know it, and the equator, which is still the equator at all times, lined up in the center. That's why it's weird that this continent like is spread out over what you guys might be like, isn't that the Pacific? And like, yeah, longitude-wise, yeah. But you guys can see here, land is interesting, right? There's nothing there. It's all, I'm sure it would have been prettier than just brown, but there certainly shouldn't be any green. We don't have any evidence for any real eukaryotic life living up on land at this time period. So in the oceans, interesting. There are really fun fossils from like microbial crusts that are like probably in like intertidal areas. And there was just like one fossil I saw once that in a talk that was so cool. It's a Cambrian fossil of something like, who knows what it is, like sliding up out of the surf and like munching on the microbial crust that's like above the tide line and then going back into the surf. It's who knows what it is, but there's like trace fossils of animals coming out of the ocean for like a minute, but they don't stay out of the ocean. I think that's cool. For vertebrates, this is what I want you guys to keep in mind. And again, we're going to be trying to focus on vertebrates as best we can. For the Cambrian period, we can infer the presence of many chordates and some vertebrates like from the fossil record. The phylogeny lets us know that they should be there. especially that conodont line that goes all the way down into the Cambrian. We're going to talk about conodonts in a second. But so a cyclostome lineage and these other lineages are inferred to be present in the Cambrian. We don't yet have their fossils. I hope someday someone's going to be like, check it out at some conference, and they'll have a Cambrian, you know, jawless fish that's more closely related to gnathostomes than cyclostomes, and everyone will be pumped. And then there's something like Hycoichthys. Okay, we're going to keep going with the same pattern. How about the Ordovician? The Ordovician goes from here to here. What's going on in vertebrate evolution when you have the Ordovician? What's different? What's the same? Talk to your neighbors. So what's different about the Ordovician? What's different about the Ordovician period? Things you guys are talking about? Yeah.
There doesn't seem quite as much growth and diversity.
Meaning these like splits.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my little cartoon diagram. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's a couple big clades. And remember, by the way, if you break this gray box open, there might be 100 kinds of conodont that all have their own splits, right? But at this big scale of these giant clades that we assume, we think with good evidence are monophyletic clades that have a name, but within them, there might be all kinds of diversity happening. But on this scale, okay, yes, I agree. It's a difference from like da. It's really only what? This one, that one. What else? I think it's cool that if you take like hagfish and lamprey today, their molecularly estimated divergence is in this Ordovician period. That's why this blue dot's here. That's evidence-driven dot. I think that's cool. Why isn't it up here? Oh, because the molecules predict it's actually down here. I like that. The thing I would say is like, how about this? The Ordovician actually has a lot more fossils. Several lineages of these organisms are actually known from rocks that are Ordovician in age. So we can actually talk about real stuff and look at real anatomy once you get into the Ordovician. Here's your Ordovician slide for you guys. The Ordovician goes from 487 to 443. So a nice 40-some million year period. Yes, there's that mural from the title slide, a beautiful Ordovician mural from a natural history museum. The big story of the Ordovician, and again, we're going to do this in lab in a couple weeks, is this event called the Gobe. It's hardly an event because, again, it takes a long time, many millions of years. But something that we observe in the fossil record of the Ordovician is this explosion in diversity, meaning a lot of species in the clades that are there. And most of the clades that are expanding everywhere in the Ordovician are kind of familiar to you guys. It's not like the Cambrian when you're like, I don't really know what that is. I don't really know what that is. In the Ordovician, there's obvious echinoderms, obvious corals, obvious jellies, obvious arthropods, obvious echinoderms, obvious worms, obvious cephalopods, things like octopuses and things, or not octopuses proper, but like these relatives of things like octopus and squid. There's these radiations happening and a huge increase all over the globe, and every single way we can really measure biodiversity, the Ordovician is incredibly more diverse than the Cambrian is. And so this is a really important thing. This Paleozoic evolutionary fauna, again, we'll talk about it in lab, really sets it up, and the radiations that happen in the Ordovician go all the way through the whole rest of the Paleozoic, hundreds of millions of years of time, but it starts in the Ordovician, which is really cool. Whoop. Here's Earth in the Ordovician. One of the coolest things about the Ordovician, I think, is that geologists can show us really strong and powerful evidence of like a southern hemisphere glaciation on land. So there's a little bit of an ice age, especially at the end of the Ordovician. Most of the life that we have fossils of is in these shallow seaways all over the place. So there's good global fossil record. You can find fossils all over the world today from the Ordovician. Up on land, there is evidence of like certain fungi lineages, and there's some fossils of early bryophytic plants. Bryophytes are plants like mosses. starting to like establish themselves on land. Really simple vasculature, really simple ways of moving water around, but for the most part, requiring water to reproduce. If you don't know about mosses are basically like the amphibians of plants. They actually need water to like move their gametes around. So it's kind of like a frog situation, but it's a plant. So still though, in the Ordovician, which I think is quite a long time ago, there are lineages poking up onto land. For vertebrates, nobody's on land, not in the Ordovician. This is one of the greatest genera in the history of the world. I encourage you all to try to say it without me saying it first. Say it to yourself, say it out loud. Sacabambaspis. Sacabambaspis is from Bolivia, which is a cool place to be from, period. And it's one of these early armored jawless fishes. I'm going to show you Sacabambaspis here in a second. But in the story for the Ordovician for you guys is that there's almost all the jawless fishes are there and inferred or with proper fossils like Sacabambaspis. But the first jawed vertebrates are also definitely inferred to be there because we have fossils from the very beginning of the next period that are diverse. So we are missing a good Ordovician record of some jawed vertebrates, but we would expect them to be there. Really fun. All right, last time I'll ask you to do this. What's going on in the Silurian? All right, what are some things you guys are talking about? Lots of fossils. I'll take lots of fossils. All these lineages have beautiful, almost. Iridaspids are already gone. Oh, Iridaspids. Sorry. But that's what happens. How about this? There are fossils of jawed vertebrates. That's exciting. And the Conodont record goes all the way back to the Cambrian, which means animals like Metaspergina are not ancestral vertebrates. They just teach you about the anatomy. I like that there's fossils that are gnathostome fossils, jawed vertebrate fossils, that are way older than any living cyclostome group. So how useful is a lamprey to understanding the origins of jaws? I don't know. We don't even have lampreys until jaws have been around for a really long time. So maybe there's jawless fishes that'll help me, but maybe lamprey is not that jawless fish. Anyway, kind of a fun thing. Here's your Silurian summary slide. Silurian's a really nice time period. This is also hilariously short. It's only 20-some million years long. So for most geological periods, it's several tens of millions of years. The Silurian's quite short. So people named all these units of time, these periods, mostly in the 1800s, when we didn't know how old all the rocks were. We could just map the fossils that were in them. And it just turns out that the Silurian just keeps getting pinched. It's actually kind of short. But it's like a nice time to be alive. Nothing bad is happening, quote unquote, during the Silurian, mass extinctions or anything. We'll talk about that. Warm and stable, really high sea levels. So a lot of the continents are flooded with ocean. That might be just because how the ocean dynamics are, that the floors of the oceans are up a little bit. So there's water then pushed onto the continents. That means we have a really good fossil record from the Silurian because fishes that die right here and they get buried and become fossils, when the water drains away later, this is still a continent. Maybe it's Asia, maybe it's North America, but we'll find those fossils, which is really cool. Vertebrate diversity definitely shows up in freshwater ecosystems for sure during the Silurian. In the Ordovician and the Cambrian, the vertebrates we have are in marine settings, saltwater settings. What's exciting is up on land. We'll touch on this again, don't worry. We definitely have early vascular plants that have like some height to them that move water from roots up through photosynthesizing leaves. That's very cool. There's also some fungi on land that are pretty stunning. We'll talk about those again also later. And there's terrestrial animals coming up onto land, but none of those terrestrial animals are vertebrates. There are like things like arthropods. And so that's when I say arthropods : this is things like centipede, millipede relatives, spider, scorpion relatives, insect relatives, all coming up out of the water differently. Those are all independent invasions of land by each of those lineages, but up on land. For vertebrates, like you guys just said, lots and lots and lots of fossils. In the oceans, there's many kinds of jawless fishes and a couple of jawed fishes showing up. That's what this one is. Oh no, not that one. Back there. Also, nice diversity of so many other animals. This is one of those ones that's very famous to people from a fossil standpoint. These are called sea scorpions. Sea scorpions are really abundant in the Silurian. The biggest sea scorpions are not in the Devonian, or sorry, not in this period. The biggest sea scorpions are just for fun, because I'm not going to talk about them because it's not the right class. But the biggest sea scorpions are like 8-ish feet long animals, which I think is pretty cool. There's a lot of really good paleo art you can find of basically this animal going like this and eating a vertebrate. That's kind of cool. All right. So here's the phylogeny. I wanted you guys to get a little bit of a sense of practicing all throughout the rest of class. We're going to be able to like use these time-calibrated phylogenies to then look over towards the timeline and come up with ideas and things we want to talk about. You guys might make observations. I might not say something. You'll be like, wait a minute, but doesn't that mean this? Please do that, because I really want you to try to use these. These are slides that I made. So they're cartoons. I've usually tried to be very specific about a couple things that won't matter to you guys. But if there's something that looks weird, you can tell me and I'll see if I did it on purpose or not. Now we can also use these same time-calibrated phylogenies to map the synapomorphies of the clades as you guys kind of learn about vertebrate evolution. So we have 3 synapomorphies for Vertebrata. So that's true for these guys and you. But it's also true for all the other animals here that are fossils. And those 3 synapomorphies, if you remember, were that tripartite brain, a skull around that tripartite brain, and vertebrate, a backbone, your notochord becoming a serialized segmented structure with cartilage or maybe bone forming the actual vertebrae. So those are the synapomorphies you already know. Here they are on the paleo version of our tree. I'm going to give you a little bit of diversity now for all these clades, and you're going to see we're going to get a synapomorphy for Conodonts and a couple of synapomorphies for this clade here, an Aspida. So this next part is just fun because I want you to actually see these things because they're beautiful and interesting. Imagine their little lives. Some of them are big, but mostly they're small. So these are aspids. They go from, I don't know why that's an animation. They go from the early Silurian up towards the late Devonian. It's a little bit controversial on like when they actually disappear. There are a couple extinction events in the end of the Devonian we're going to talk about in a week or two. And these animals live up to then, but it's a little bit smushy. I'd like you, please, to talk to your neighbors and make some observations about these jawless fishes. We think these are all stem cyclostomes, so related to lampreys and hagfish, but they're obviously not those. So what's going on with aspids? Talk to your neighbors. Some of them have a bunch these ones still play. You know, that's not All right, so what are some things you're noticing about these aspids? Yeah, Trevor.
They have more like, I guess, complex fin structures, it looks like.
They got some kind of fin stuff going on. Jamoitius here is a really important fossil. There's actually just a paper, I don't remember if it was Nature or Science, but it was like 2 days ago. And I almost put it in this lecture and I was like, no, you don't need to do that. But Jamoitius is really interesting because it has these things that are called fin folds. And so you can imagine how developmental biologists would be interested in like, how do you even form fins? Maybe later we'll talk about fins becoming limbs, but how do you form fins in the first place? And so Jamoitius has these folds where it's like, they're in the places you'd expect, like 2 like this and 1 on top, but they go the whole length of its body. So that's very cool. Is this homologous to the fins that gnathostomes might have later? Maybe. I actually don't think so because of the phylogeny, but experimenting a little bit with fin structure. Other fossils that are in this group don't seem to have anything like that. What else?
I like this split. The
The caudal fin. So these are vertebrates, and they have a vertebral column that replaces their notochord. But it's true, they all have this shared feature where what happens is the vertebral column goes kind of down at the end, and then the caudal fin that is a chordate feature that vertebrates inherit, has a lobe that gets expanded, so it kind of looks like a fishy tail. But the vertebrae go down into that, we call it ventral. We're going to do anatomical directions in the lab next week. But ventral means down on the body plan. And so this ventrally directed vertebral column making up that bigger caudal fin structure is called a hypocercal tail. That is one of the features that really unites these guys. So hypocercal, you don't have to worry about what that means exactly, but it does mean like a going down into the bottom lobe, the ventral lobe of the tail, the vertebral column does. I'll show you guys a whole bunch of vertebrates that do it differently when they make a tail that pretty much looks like what you think a tail should look like on the outside. The other thing that's kind of cool about them is, like you guys already said, some of them have these body fins. I really like anaspids because they look like what I would always think those kind of wormy early vertebrates would look like. But remember, not the Cambrian, not even the Ordovician. Their fossils are up in the Silurian. But it's still a mouth, no jaws, the pharyngeal gills, caudal fin, notochord with vertebrae. Okay, so it's a vertebrate. Dorsal hollow nerve cord. Those chordate and vertebrate characters are kind of obvious still as like main features you can actually see on them. But they're doing some interesting stuff. The next clade that's, we think, one tick up closer towards hagfish and lampreys, so another stem cyclostome, are these animals called conodonts. And so there's the ones that really are exciting because they go from the early Cambrian period all the way up into the Mesozoic era when there's dinosaurs walking around. So that's their record. Hilarious, right? It's almost everything I can show you. It's conodonts. Here's what conodonts look like as fossils. This is why the conodont record goes back so far. They have these structures. These are oral structures. They're mouth structures. They're probably something you could even call tooth structures. They're not homologous in terms of the tissue that makes them with the teeth you guys have or any gnathostome has. They're made of like, again, another like phosphate-based chemical compound. So you're having vertebrates, again, playing with hard tissues. But what's great about conodonts is that these are incredibly intricate structures. And if you have a lot of easily fossilizable hard parts that are really, really, really ornate and detailed, a bunch of nerds can dig them up and name a million species and try to figure out the evolution of this clade. So there's a lot of anatomy of a piece, sorry, a lot of details on a piece of anatomy that fossilizes really well. So we have a really excellent conodont fossil record, and then a lot of really high awareness of their taxonomy. For a very long time in the history of paleontology, people would call these, when they found them, conodont elements. And maybe they're from vertebrates, maybe they're not from vertebrates. All I know is that we're finding them. And it's only been in the last couple decades that people have found some like really well-preserved fossils that have all the pieces together, so we understand how conodont mouths kind of work. And a couple of those have soft tissue. You can actually see the conodonts' little bodies. Does anybody here know what a conodont looks like already, besides the little picture I've showed you? Because this is a figure from our press release from the paper that came out that had a really nice conodont element apparatus all articulated with eyeballs. This is what conodont faces look like. Oh, wait, no. I'm going to skip that to show you the conodont face. I want you to see it. So there's conodont faces. They're so cute, I think, once you actually have them. They have their camera eyeballs, they have their gills, they have only the caudal fin, but they have these really complicated jaws. And so they look like hagfish and lamprey to me in the sense of having phosphatic teeth that are doing something interesting, but like not at all like those guys. Some people wonder if they're filter feeding and this is like all bark but no bite, like it's just like a lot of structure, because they certainly aren't large. It's like doing like a lamprey thing where they suck. People don't really know. I'm gonna go back here real quick because I want us to pay attention to this. So conodont elements, those really intricate pieces, are a really, really, really excellent and actually quite rare example of vertebrates being really helpful to like all kinds of geologists. They can be these things called index fossils. And so you guys remember we did this way back in lecture 2, actually not lecture 4, I'll fix that, where you guys kind of learned about relative dating and absolute dating, and you correlated, you know, different layers. And so I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly instead of having you guys talk to each other because I've seen what time it is. But if you think about those biostratigraphy lessons we kind of had at the beginning, where it's like older rocks are generally at the bottom, younger rocks are generally on top. You might have different rocks with different levels of fossil occurrences in them. You know, you find another one, you can make some correlations maybe. And maybe this is like this, and there's a new layer on this hillside, there's a new one. And if you add radiometric dates, you can get some kind of idea. I was going to have you guys all do this, but I'm blowing it past that. What I think is important is that some fossils have really, really limited durations. Individual, like quote unquote, species of those conodont elements are a great example of that. Each little form might only last for a couple million years. And therefore, if you find that form, you might have a really good idea of how old rocks are. And so paleontologists use this all the time, where like, let's say you have a brand new layer you've never seen before, and it has something really cool, like soft tissue preservation, like the snail has a face. If you have some fossil like this one here, maybe, that only ever occurs in a tight window, maybe between 50 and 48 million years ago, you can get really excited because this fossil by itself, even if you have no volcanic rocks, can give you a pretty good estimate of how old those rocks really are. And so this is what an index fossil is. Helpful in identifying relatively short intervals of time. And so index fossils are usually invertebrates of different kinds, usually like animals that are in the plankton or eukaryotes that are in the plankton, or some kind of hard shell animal. But conodonts are one of these things that actually get used all the time as index fossils. Each like little species level thing of conodonts have short temporal ranges. They're really easy to find. And they're like anybody who doesn't specialize in them can like look at them and be like, yeah, it's this one, can identify what it is. So index fossils are a really, really, really big deal for dating Earth's history. And I really wanted you guys to know that conodonts are like one of the only vertebrates. They're like invertebrate grade usefulness when it comes to understanding the rock record. This is one of those fossils of all those conodont elements like lined up in articulation. So you can imagine the mouth and like the pharynx, the early part of the throat of that conodont right here. So it's doing something cool, probably, right? None of them are big. They're all tiny little animals. So don't worry if you go swimming in the past, you won't get eaten by some giant conodont. Anyway. I really like this. We've only really recently put those anaspids. Here they are right here. Anaspids, a bunch of different ones. Here's their common ancestor. This is anaspids. Here's conodonts with their stratigraphic range. Here's Ediacaran all the way to today. Only recently have we started to find those fossils I just showed you guys of some of those like fossil hagfish and fossil lamprey. This fossil hagfish that I already showed you was really, really, really a big deal when it came out. Like it was only 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember being in a conference when like the guy showed his fossil hagfish, even though it's from the Cretaceous. And like all these people in the room, including like older paleontologists, older fish scientists were like, oh, finally. And so people have done these anatomical reconstructions. And that's like, well, the first time that with pretty good evidence, a phylogeny turned out anaspids and euconodonts being on the line to hagfish and lamprey, stem hagfish lamprey. It's kind of a new thing. And I just think it's cool for you guys to like think about that this science is kind of always happening. And these two getting put over here has only been going on for 6 or 7 years, but I'm kind of convinced. And I think that's really fun. Okay. How are we doing? Oh, yeah, we're all right. For the rest of class, I hope we can make our way up the gnathostome stem. So these are clades also of jawless fishes, but they're clades that we're very, very confident are increasingly closely related to the jawed fishes. So I have 2 features I can give you, 2 synapomorphies that unite this node right here, the common ancestor of all these stem gnathostomes and crown gnathostomes. But before I do that, I want you to really see like how many there are. This lecture always kind of like breaks my brain because I want to show you 1 million of these fish, and that would be irresponsible because then we won't have time for rhinoceroses and dinosaurs. But I just want you to know like how many of them there are. There's like hundreds and hundreds of species. They're all really interesting. Lots of really fun stuff is happening. If you care, you all have projects to think about, presentations to think about. You can jump in. But okay, here's 2 features, 2 synapomorphies for all the gnathostome side of Vertebrata. One is a dermal skeleton. And so what I mean by that is on the outside of their bodies, they have some sort of hard tissue covering. Modern day sharks and fishes have scales. Us up on land have kind of lost a lot of that covering. But this dermal skeleton is an ancestral feature. So here's a whole bunch of fishes with different scale structures, including shark, which has a very, very different scale structure than the living fishes do. But that dermal skeleton goes back really far. All these animals have almost totally cartilaginous skeletons inside their bodies, meaning like their vertebrae aren't bone, but the outside of their bodies are different kinds of bony and even kind of tooth-like structures. You're going to see this a little bit more as we work our way up the vertebrate tree. But some of these structures on the outside of their bodies, tissue-wise, look just like teeth. They almost have it. Some of them have enamel or enamel-like covering on the actual outsides of their bodies. There's a lot going on here evolution-wise. These animals are experimenting with hard tissues, but that dermal skeleton, the presence of some kind of like armory thing, is definitely a feature that these gnathostome side fishes all share. There's Sacabambaspis. There's another one called Drepanaspis. And that's what everyone kind of always thinks about. They have these like almost shield-like structures on their body with lots of other like little finicky details. The other one that I think is really cool is these fishes. None of the cyclostomes, stem or crown, but the gnathostome side have what's called a lateral line system. People ever heard of a lateral line system before? So all fishes today, and a lot of amphibians, have a lateral line system. Here's a nice little trout. You can see it's got lines on its face, but mostly there's this line going down its body. That line is a cavity where water can be let under the scales of the fish in just that little place. And then there's these little sensory cells that are sticking out into that water. And when water pressure changes next to the fish, maybe it's in a school and its neighbor turns, maybe somebody's sneaking up on it, whatever. Anytime there's water pressure change on the outside of that fish, it propagates down into the lateral line. The fish has an extremely high sensitivity to sense that vibrational change, and it can move or react to. So without having to like physically see what's going on, a fish can feel the water around it. That's how fish schools are so tight sometimes, because they're all sensing each other with their lateral lines. They have a very, 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 very fine awareness of the water moving around them. Sharks have lateral lines today, and even some of these early armored fishes, these jawless fishes, have in their, I know this doesn't show it to you very well, but have in their actual like hard chunks of armor, like the same little like pitting that has always been inferred to be the exact same kind of thing as the lateral line system. And in some of these ones, we can actually make that connection because there's like nerve passageways all the way up to their brain. So a lateral line system for moving through the water with a really high level of awareness of your surroundings is a gnathostome thing. Can you guys imagine like the little wormy thing in the Cambrian? And you had to get to something that's kind of like a sharky thing. There is a lot of upgrades in like your mobility and your stability and your sensory systems to be a really excellent open water swimmer. And so these are ancestral features for this whole gnathostome side of the tree. Does that make sense? Okay. Those are my two features for all of these guys. We're going to go up to this clade right here. I think you can see this clade's pretty decked out. And I got one feature for both of those, and that's that really heavy dorsal, which means on top, and ventral, which means on bottom, head shields. There's one group that only exists during the Ordovician, the Arandaspids, and there's that absolute fantastic animal, Sacabambaspis there. Do me a favor, imagine being this little animal. What's the deal? What's it like? What are you noticing? Talk to each other about Arandaspids.
That is, oh wow, it's totally serious.
Oh, yeah, I think the brown one has full ring. Yeah, it's the tail.
Yeah.
It's got some side. Yeah, it's a joke.
All right, so what are some things? Yeah.
It was hard trying to find where the gills were.
Huh? Sure. I would describe these as weird little dudes. Like they are, yeah, the gills are in like kind of the gap here between these like two shields they have. Yeah. I like fossils like this so much because you look at it and you're like, that can't be the real thing. And you're like, no, I guess it was. That's what I like about it. This? How about fins? It's just that caudal, and that caudal fin's a chordate character they're inheriting, right? That caudal tail fin, sure, but no other fin structures that we can see. No jaws, definitely a mouth. You guys have maybe seen this before. This is a real model from the Natural History Museum. This gets memed all the time. Forever surprised. Second Bass. There's a Netflix special. I forget what it's called. Anybody know there was like a Netflix paleo show a year or two ago? Anyway, Morgan Freeman's the narrator, and you can actually find outtakes for when Morgan Freeman was recording, and he like loses it when he sees Second Bass. And they stop recording. And he's like, okay, I'm good. Because how can you make this face look any better than you can go look that up if you want. These are just interesting. They're fun. There's a lot of very amazing biology about them as like individual taxa. We just don't have time, unfortunately, to get into it today. That is one of the better Saccamabaspis fossils, by the way. Like that is what that is. So we actually know its anatomy. It's just like, wow, that's it. Tiny eyes, way up front. I like imagining these animals' ecologies. What are they eating all day? They don't have jaws. How does it work? I don't know. Yeah, Caden.
I have a question about kind of with the Sacca then.
You got it. Come on.
Sacca then
Baspis. There you go. Okay.
Because like technically with forward-facing eyes, it means they're a predator. So
If you're talking about eagles or you know cats, yes. I don't think that's quite always necessarily the case, but it's fun to think about, right? Forward-facing eyes always a predator? I don't know. I'll let you decide what you think. Maybe, I don't know, of plankton? I guess. Yeah.
Big or
I don't need to put my elbow up. All right, here's the other group in that clade. So also with the dorsal and ventral head shields, this clade is hilariously more diverse. There's many taxa in this clade. There's many clades within this clade that have their own names that I'm sparing you from because you can see there's lots of anatomy. Do me a favor though, what's cool about these guys?
That was just spatial. What I call
yeah.
Yeah, so like what are some inferences you can kind of make? I mean, there is a lot of stuff happening here. So what are some inferences you could maybe make about one of them or whatever? I heard you guys say a lot of this already, but
I feel like with flatheads, they could be like a characteristic that they live kind of towards the bottom.
yeah, so seafloor animals, organisms that live on the seafloor are called benthic organisms. So being a benthic adapted animal, Pycnosteus here, Pycnosteus here is reconstructed as probably being like a big like sediment feeder, like sifting the sediment. So like going down on the bottom there. Here's one coming in for a landing. This one's working on it. These are interesting. They don't have jaws, right? Some of these animals, only now, people can use like high resolution, like CT scans to look at some of these fossils. Some of them have like actual pieces of bony armor like arranged around their mouth. Like they don't have a jaw. They got a whole bunch of little pieces of armor that are like maybe movable so they can still process something. It's so cool. They don't have jaws, they don't have teeth, but they do have things, processed food potentially. So a larger, flatter animal, I've seen that before. Stingray maybe kind of thing. Great. What about if you cover your body in like big, long, pointy things? What could you infer about animals that cover their body in big, long, pointy things? Yeah, I don't know, but at least partially, right? It's hard to swallow a bunch of spikes. Like there's lots of animals that go spike mode to not get eaten. Yeah.
or it could be like if they're on floor, they're using it to like dig out or build a path.
Could be doing something like that. I want you guys to know that these structures here on this animal, Doriaspis, those are not homologous in any way to like any fin that another vertebrate has. It's just like armor that sticks out like that. Is that just stability in the water column? How good a swimmer could this animal be? Heavy front, muscular tail, but like 50-50 lengthwise. Like, what is the deal? Is it, these are really fun questions. Drepenaspis, look at that fossil. Fantastic. I always like these animals. We have a couple from Idaho. Near the Montana border in the mountains, there's some Devonian ocean rocks on those mountains. Not near the interstate. You got to go like 2 mountains over from the interstate, I-15. But we have fossils of animals like Drepenaspis from Idaho, which is really cool. They have a lot of diverse body plans, and these are one of the first groups of animals that mess with that big pharyngeal gill basket. There's only one really clear outcurrent for where the gills come out. They don't have a whole bunch. Astrapus still does have them all, but this is one of the earliest ones. You go on the phylogeny, you'll see I have that one really low, but most of the later ones only have a single gill opening. It's one of the ways we can recognize them for being what they are. A long time, a lot of cool stuff. Anytime you see a bar on these slides I'm going to give you, it goes for like 100 million years, 100 million years of those guys. There's probably so much cool biology. So if they're interesting to you, Google them. You'll find stuff. There's so much. I can only flash it at you for a second. All right, now we'll go up here more close to the common ancestor of the jawed vertebrates. This clade, I'm not giving you any features for it, but I want you to know it because I think it's cool. This is almost the opposite of those heterostracans and Aradaspids, because instead of having really heavy armor, these animals are almost totally known from millions and millions of these little tiny scales that all fit together. So not a big armor plate, but lots of like tight skin. So that dermal skeleton that all these gnathostomes, stem and crown, have are present, but being, evolved in different ways. This is a really wonderful little fishy. There's the mouth, all those external gill openings. It does have its caudal fin. Here's the fossil, one of them. There's a lot of fossils. This is the one, Vertebrate. It's got a forked tail. But these are most of the fossil record of these animals. Phelodonts are these like individual scales. I'm going to show you some shark scales and some other hard tissues that look like teeth next week. These scales have a lot of that same structure. They kind of grow like your teeth grow, but these are scales on these little jawless fishes. One thing that's really cool about them is that they are almost certainly open ocean swimmers. They're often found in like deeper water kind of rocks. They have scales around their mouths, versions of these that they're probably using to process food. They don't have jaws, but they have, kind of like the heterostracans have pieces of armor. These guys have specialized versions of these scales, and some of them have those same scales kind of in their throats. So maybe having a set of jaws, or at least not jaws, but a way to process your food, but like down in your mouth already. A lot of fishes today do that. We're going to talk about it. You might know about eels kind of have like alien jaw. So pharyngeal processing and like mouth opening specializations. Many of these animals do have nice fossils like Vertebrate. Weirdly, there's one genus. Anybody want to go for it? Phylogeny. Phylogeny has little fin-like structures that look like those same folds that other stem cyclostome, those Aradaspids, which like Jimoitius had, like a whole body long fin thing. This one has like a little nubbin. Are these also experimenting with like stability in the water? Developmental biology questions are really interesting here. We don't really know. These guys are cute, they're tiny, and they're kind of everywhere because their fossils are really easy to find. Okay, we're gonna go up one more. You guys are gonna like these ones. These are Galeaspids. All right, do me a favor, talk to each other about Galeaspids. What seems interesting about them? Would you want to be a Galeaspid? Okay, go ahead.
Probably so.
Yeah, so
I think there's a lot of areas. I think that's it.
well, what kids can I choose? We got so many.
No, that's Lamprey with that's mountains. Oh, it's up and down. Yeah, it's mountains. So it is.
Yeah.
All right, I can tell some of you have read the text and not just looked at the pictures. That's not their mouth up top. That's one single giant nostril for bringing in water. So their mouths are on the bottom. So here's one sitting here. Isn't that a great genus? Shuyu. It's from China. So here's Shuyu on the ground, on the bottom of the lake. Then here's like one swimming for a second. So that's the mouth. The nostrils up on top. This is not its mouth as much as you might really want it to be. Not its mouth. None of these are mouths. This is ridiculous. So things I would notice about these guys that I think are important is like, I see a lot of like ecological convergence. Some of those heterostracans kind of looked like these things, but this is a different clade that's involving similar body plans, probably for the same evolutionary reasons, convergent reasons. Don't eat me, maybe, stabilization, maybe, swimming around on the bottom, processing muck on the bottom. That's really cool. These are not related to each other in terms of like the same shape appearing in different clades. We can kind of trust that as a signal for like ecological adaptation. Very similar inherited body plan, of course. So there's only so many ways to go with it. The thing that's important for these guys is that, again, we're going to talk about this in lab next week, but these animals all have what's called dermal bone, dermal skeletons. You guys have part of your skeleton, this part that I'm hitting is dermal. Other parts of your skeleton have a different developmental origin. We'll talk about it in lab. Kind of, they form in cartilage first, and then they become bone. It's called endochondral bone. Some of these fishes, not all of them, some of them, have only in their brain cases, the really most precious parts of their skeleton, precursors to a bone type that looks like the bone type that you have. The bone type of like those big armored heterostracans a second ago isn't very similar to the way your bone is structured. Most of their bone isn't either, but some of them have in their brain bone that looks like the bone that all of us are using right now, endochondral bone. It's really cool. So there's a lot of like very like woo-woo big picture evolutionary biology. These fishes are very popular, all the ones I've been showing you, and like people who really care about where anatomy comes from and how any animal group would evolve hard tissue. It's a lot of really open and really fascinating questions in these guys. I think from a paleo perspective, another thing that you guys should always keep in mind, and this is going to be true for any group we're talking about, none of these organisms are like trying to do anything evolutionarily. We're not trying to eventually make a bony jawed vertebrate. They're living their own lives. It's being selected for. They're living for millions and millions and millions of years just fine. It just so happens that we can use them to interrogate where our own structures come from. But they're living their own lives just fine. Don't worry about Shuyu. Anyway, kind of fun. And that's also recent science, again, based on like CT work. Oh yeah, here we go. We're going to do it. So we got one group here that for a very, 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 very long time in the history of paleo has always been very closely aligned with the gnathostomes. Also jawless, but no one's concerned that they are the sister to our group, the jawed fishes. They're called the osteostracans. I've got three features though that we have and osteostracans have. Snapomorphies for you guys to know. I think they're important. There's one osteostracan up there, cephalaspis, and there's three gnathostomes, three jawed vertebrates. And here's characters that we share with them. The presence of pectoral fins, like true fins up in the front. That is a character that osteostracans and gnathostomata have together. A dorsal fin, meaning a midline structure on the back of the animal. And then also a heterocircle tail. So those Arandaspids you met first, their vertebrae go all the way down into the bottom lobe, the ventral lobe of their tail, and then there's like a fin sticking out off of the vertebrae. That's called a hypocircle tail. These fishes have vertebrae that go up into the top lobe of their tail, and then a fin that sticks down. It makes the same functional shape in the water maybe, but the vertebrae go like this, not like that. And that is called a heterocircle tail. Heterocircle tail is the ancestral tail for all jawed vertebrates. Lampreys and hagfish don't have anything like that. But all the jawed vertebrates have heterocircle tail ancestrally. Pectoral fins and dorsal fins also are shared. Cool. So that's this node. But now we can take a quick detour to meet these little cuties called osteostracans. I've got one synapomorphy for them just because they're so clear when you see them. But I'll let you guys look at these ones first. What seems interesting about osteostracans to you? Like, talk to your neighbors. What's something you're noticing about osteostracans? I've heard people say they look like, if you guys know what this animal is in the first place, it kind of looks like you just put a fish tail on like a horseshoe crab kind of thing. Big old circle of armor, eyeballs up top, all the important mouth stuff is down on the bottom. Here's the mouth, and then all the gill excurrent comes out on the bottom too. So if you ever see like a stingray or something, that's what they look like on the bottom. Mouth with the gills kind of right there. So water goes in and out on the bottom. Otherwise, they're staying on the bottom. All these animals are inferred to be like benthic animals. There's no like open water, open ocean, rounded heterostracans. Osteostracans. They're all like associated with the benthos. Their eyeballs point upward. Just fun. I like these fossils too because when you see them, they are just like, well, that's it. Like there it is. They have these really interesting sensory fields on their foreheads and on their cheeks. Those are real. And we can trace them with CT scanning. They're really, 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 really highly sensitive. So they must be doing something. Who knows if it's electrosensory, chemosensory. They must be moving around, sensing probably maybe little invertebrates in the mud and the sand, keeping their faces down there and then slurping them up. Cool. But again, they have pectoral fins and dorsal fins and a big heterocircle tail. That does characterize them accurately, but they didn't evolve those on their own. We think they share those features with us. So like a common ancestor for those kinds of features. One thing that's cool too is that these head shields aren't at all, in terms of their construction, like some of the very giant head shields you've already seen. Some of those bigger fishes I showed you earlier have just like a giant slab of bone on top of their head. These break up. There's a lot of little tesserae, a little bit of bones. There's a million little pieces that fit together to make that instead of one big bone. So it looks the same, but it's made very differently. Interesting. And again, look at this. In a very long time, none of these animals are like on the way to anything else. They are their own biodiverse group. Okay. I'm going to give you 3 characters here that are only for the animals with jaws, the actual gnathostome vertebrates. And so you have these a little bit. You can see how the spread works out. Okay. Here's those 3 characters I want to show you. Number 1 is pelvic fins. So pectoral fins are the fins up front associated with the forelimbs in us. Those are shared with osteostracans. Pelvic fins, though, are the back fins. This is a sad picture of a coelacanth on a bench. Don't put coelacanths on benches. But here's the pectoral fin. Here's the 2 pelvic fins. Here's those same gnathostomes from before. Pelvic fins are these 2 back here. And then here's a nice fossil of a placoderm, which is a jawed fish we're going to learn about. And they have pelvic fins there at the back. So paired front fins, osteostracans have them too. Paired back fins, only the jawed vertebrates have those. I think this one is incredibly cool. If you guys go inside your ear, you got an outer ear, which you can all see usually, a middle ear, which helps sound move from outside to your brain, and then an inner ear. The inner ear is where the nerves attach onto, and there's a lot going on in your inner ear. One of the most important parts of your inner ear are these 3 semicircular canals. These are 3 canals that are full of liquid that are positioned in 3D space. The balance of the liquid in those 3 canals are how you know your own balance. Your awareness of yourself in space comes from these 3 semicircular canals. People who have things like vertigo might just have like a clog or an issue with their semicircular canals, so they can't balance. Hagfish, lampreys, all kinds of jawless vertebrates have 0, maybe, well, I'm sorry, not 0 usually, 1 or maybe 2 semicircular canals. All gnathostomes, all jawed vertebrates have 3. And so we have very good 3-dimensional space awareness of our heads. And you can imagine for any bilaterian animal who's got all the sensory structures up front, if you're swimming out in the open water, this is where that first evolves. So sharks have 3 semicircular canals, so do fish, so do frogs, so do you. That's a gnathostome thing. So again, awareness of your body in 3-dimensional space is kind of the important product of having that kind of inner ear. There it is. And then lastly, LOL, just like for vertebrata, I made you remember vertebrae. Believe it or not, gnathostomes all have jaws, jawed vertebrates. And so here's a placoderm, here's a cartilaginous fish, and here's a bony fish. They've all got jaws, and that's what we'll be doing next week. Cool.